Today we will discuss the important area of financing for sustainable development. After the 4 previous components of our dialogue series that have been discussed, which included the need for strong social protection measures, advanced digital solutions, a green economy to sustain people and planet, and the latest conversation about effective institution and governance, we are here to discuss financing of the SDGs and COVID-19 recovery. So this is the 5th installment of the Open Dialogue series that we have started. And the Open Dialogue series, they are really about a conversation with you. We cannot do this alone. UNDP is yours. As we say, the UN, we the peoples in the Charter, and the goal 17 has never been more important than now when we're in the midst of the crisis. So as we develop our offer, we want to do this in partnership with colleagues, of course, in the UN system, but also beyond. And we want to hear your questions and suggestions to improve our way of working. Just some facts to remind us. Global economy is expected to shrink by 5.2% this year, which would represent the deepest recession since the Second World War. In April 2020, 50 million people were already falling into extreme poverty, but we know by now that we see an estimated number increasing towards 100 million people this year. And given the severity of the pandemic, not only on global health, but also the socioeconomic impacts on people all around the world, the scale of the task that we have rebuilding our economies into more inclusive, green financial system means only one thing. As I've said, no one can do this alone. We need partnerships. We need them between governments, United Nations, the international financial institutions. We need the civil society and the private sector. And this includes financing the recovery from COVID-19 and beyond into the Sustainable Development Goals and the future. So financing, of course, is an incredibly important area. We also see how foreign direct investments, remittances, but also ODA is threatened at the same time as we have this crisis. We need also to invest in resilient economic system guided by the global frameworks we have decided upon, the Sustainable Development Goals, the financing for development, but also the Paris Agreement. This needs to lead government. This needs to lead businesses and investors towards the resilient response and recovery that we would want to see. The response can simply not be de-linked from the Sustainable Development Goals. On the contrary, we were moving in reverse in relation to some important goals, inequality, environment and climate change already when we took the measure a year ago during the General Assembly. The recovery must also be coordinated and driven by a spirit of global solidarity. Multilateralism matters more than ever before in times of global challenges. And I think that this is a good reminder of us as we are in the year celebrating UN 75. Before I hand over to my colleagues, I would like to acknowledge the remarkable work of the UN discussion group, Recovering Better for Sustainability, that has been working on policy options for recovering better, building on agreed international and regional frameworks, and taking Agenda 2030 and the Paris Agreement seriously. At the UN Secretary General's request, UNDP provides the secretariat function for the discussion group 2, and Marcos Neto, who you soon will meet, who is my colleague and the director of the finance sector hub of UNDP, facilitates the secretariat together with our colleagues and the co-chairs. And this is only one proof that UNDP can be your driver of change with regard to socioeconomic recovery. You know that we have also been asked by the Secretary General to lead on the socioeconomic response and do that in coordination with colleagues on the ground, of course, led by the resident coordinator, but also with the broad range of actors that we have with international colleagues and local colleagues. So before I hand over to Marcos Neto, I will first have my dear colleague Haliang Xu, who is the director of the Policy Bureau of UNDP, also share some opening thoughts with you. Over to you, Haliang.
Thank you very much, Ulrika. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. I just wanted to say that for UNDP, financing for development and is really a critical area of work. because it cuts through, different response areas. And UNDP has been working on financing for development issues, for many years. And we're looking at a holistic approach, the whole of society approach, looking at resources that is both public and private, and both domestic and international. I think because the impact of this pandemic is really affecting all these streams of work. So I think our response to COVID also needs to look at these different areas. Some governments are able to mobilize a significant amount of resources, finding fiscal spaces, whereas some developing countries, can only mobilize a small percentage of the GDP. And so what can we do to help them to carve out the fiscal space that's necessary? Private sector has been an integral part of development financing, creating jobs, paying taxes and so forth. But they are also directly impacted by this pandemic. So what can we do to support them? To take ESG, as environment, social and the governance concerns, really integrated in their development investment projects. Right? And just last one to mention that development financing is not only about immediate response, it is also about planning for an effective recovery. Right? So how does the UNDP support the work of the country team, right? Together working with country team, supporting the governments to develop financing plans for the future. So how do we make use of the tools such as integrated national financing framework and so forth, right? So I think these are all the areas that we're concerned with. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Marcos Neto, right? UNDP's SDG Finance Sector Hub Director. And he and a set of UNDP colleagues from headquarters in the regions we'll talk about the UNDP's SDG financing vision, services, and partnerships, so that then sets the stage for our discussion. Okay, so thank you very much. Over to you, Marcos.
Thank you very much, Ulrika and Hao-Liang. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you all, colleagues. The Financial Sector Hub was created by Ulrika, Hao-Liang, and the administrator about 18 months ago, with the attempt to bring together all of UNDP's global work on public and private finance, as well as private sector models and business support, as a way to align and mobilize financial resources to the Sustainable Development Goals. So what we've been, and more recently since the COVID, to the recovery and build back better of the COVID. So what we've been doing in the last 18 months is to work bottom up from all the experience of UNDP in a coherent approach that bring all of this together and can help us better support, our clients, the governments around the world, going forward in terms of aligning and mobilizing the necessary financial resources for the SDGs. So all of this work has now been put forward to you all and to our country offices in a platform, in an online platform on UNDP SDG Finance, which I will use it now to show you and also to explain how we are organizing ourselves and how we are supporting our country offices and the UN country teams. So let's see if this works. Perfect. So what you can see here is our new platform that was launched at the beginning of August, and is sdgfinance.undp.org. So please feel free to explore and share around. So when we started this process, we settled on an approach which is guided by this wheel that you see in front of you, right? So there are 7 areas in there that we believe comprehensively and able to adapt to the reality of every and each context and country. But in principle, those 7 areas are essential for us to align and mobilize necessarily public and private capital for the SDGs. You know, the first area is the integrated national financial frameworks. In other words, the needs for governments to have financing strategies for their development plans, for the SDG plans, for the COVID-19 recovery plans, right? Those strategies then need to be brought together, right, into national budgets. They need to then, you know, lead to fiscal and debt instruments that can align and mobilize resources from the governments. They can then be leaded to, you know, the strategic use of public international finance, as well as blending instruments. Then they go around and help us figure out how do we unlock the private finance, domestic as well as foreign, and how do we influence how asset owners and asset managers make decisions on private capital. An important element of UNDP's approach on finance has to do with, you know, a lot of the private capital is not necessarily flowing in terms of financial investments and cash. It's actually inside the way a company of all sizes, SMEs, middle companies, or large multinational domestic companies, make decisions vis-a-vis their business models, right? How a company does business determines a lot on how the company seek for a financial, social, and environmental return. That's why we consider, you know, is this element here, the alignment of business models, an important part of financing the SDGs. Now, all of this needs to be measured, right? And needs to be clear in its impact. So these 7 areas combined in a flexible way is how we have a, you know, kind of look at all of our work around the world, gone up, you know, agree on this approach. This approach to some degree already existed, you know, led by Hao Liang on his previous position in UNDP as the head of the Bureau for Asia Pacific. In the Asia Pacific, we just took it out of the regional bureau and made it global. And that's an important distinction. You know, the financial sector hub is not necessarily you know, a new massive team. Is actually bringing together things that already exist and already been doing in UNDP. The last point about this wheel, which is very important, is underpinning all of this is economic governance, right? So there is a huge governance agenda here, which is a lot linked to UNDP's traditional work in terms of what is the role of government and what is the role of government and business and civil society coming together to put the rules of the game, right? You know, I think we all know that the marketplace needs to have the appropriate rules so no one is left behind, and the most vulnerable, being countries or being peoples within country, are fully put at the center of the economic models. Let me tell you how this whole approach works and all that we've been doing and putting together available for you, as Ulrika said. So I'm going to take it one part of the wheel and walk you through so you see how things work. So let's take it SDG budgeting. So you click it here and the wheel spins. And then you have our service offers around SDG budget, right? So integrated SDGs into middle terms and annual budget. And you have a description of what the service is. And more important, we have the relevant tools that have been used by UNDP and by our partners for a long time. You know, so for example, guidelines for SDG informed middle-term expenditure framework, middle-term and budgetary framework. You know, this is a lot of the work that we're doing together in partnership with the IMF. And, you know, you keep on having a lot of those, you know, NDP government financing tools. So for each one of those service areas, you have a multitude of products and tools that have been used and tested, right? So nothing here is necessarily brand new. So you click it on, and then you go for the actual tools. Here you've got the guidance notes, you've got climate change and integrated index. You have the experience, which I think is very important. So here we are, coalescing what happened in Bangladesh, what happened in Indonesia, in Nepal, in Pakistan, and we are actually making this available to all of our teams and to all of our clients in that sense. Also, we've identified the colleagues around the world that have worked on this area and are available to serve as support, right, to our teams. Now, we are also in a process of revamping and mapping all of our economists around the world, their skills, linkages to all those service areas, and beefing up, and if you want, and then increasing up those focal points of support. So that's how this structure is done for every one of those 7 areas, right? It breaks it down to the level of products, tools, experience, examples, and the people that can help our country officers and our country teams. Now, when we got to that level, we then realized that we had to make a few moonshots, if you want, a few bets. So we call them flagships. So we reconstructed from all these experience, right, 4 flagships. And I'll briefly talk about them, then I'm handed over to colleagues in the regions that can talk to you how this is landing, right, in any particularly context with concrete examples. So we have 4 flagships, which we believe are levers in a system that can help us speed up and accelerate this process of SDG financing. The first one is what Hao-Liang already mentioned, is the Integrate National Financial Frameworks. And here we have launched it in partnership with UNDESA, with the SDG fund, that the Secretariat has set up, the European Union, and we had started last September during UNGA with 16 pioneer countries that were prepared to work with us, work with this. The IMF has joined us recently to design and to putting in place those financing strategies for the SDG plans. Right now, with the support of the SDG Joint Fund and the work with many other UN agencies like UNICEF and UN Women, UNCTAD, we are leading in 52 countries around the world the establishments of those integrated national financial frameworks. Now, for 18 months, we've been working on SDG Impact, our second flagship. And here the idea, what we heard from the marketplace is the market has a series of principles, high-level principles, like the principle for responsible investment, like the UNEP principles for responsible banking. And then there is a whole body of global work on non-financial reporting, right? The GRI, the Global Reporting Institute, and so on and so forth. However, you haven't seen, as Hao-Liang said, a huge adherence to clarity on how private investment moves from the principles that it signs up to what is reporting, right? So there was a gap in the marketplace in between how does a company, how does an asset manager or an asset owner, right, internalize on a daily business level the principles, right? So we went on, that was one gap. The second gap is the famous pipeline, right? When are the projects around the world that allow an investor that wants to invest for the SDGs to know that a project is indeed aligned with the SDG or not? So SDG Impact has put 2 tools out there. One is a series of practice standards, which are linked to those global principles like the IFC principles, the PRI principles. And what they are trying to do here is to create the practice standards, the daily integration of those principles in business, right? So a company can be able to validate it, that it has the processes in place that allows itself to align its investment to the SDGs. So we have standards for private equity, we have standards for the use of proceeds of bonds, and we're soon going to have standards for enterprises, and we're putting in place a validation process by third parties. The second product is what we call SDG investment maps. So we went down and we tested this in Brazil as a tool, and we now replicated and extended in 12 other countries, a process of looking at SDG plans and national development plans and converting them into concrete investment opportunities, right? To shrink the so-called origination phase of the investment process. And we are now going to put all of this into a global platform that allow any investor, domestic, regional, global, to see, right, by SDGs, you know, by sector of the economy, what are the investment opportunities around the world that can deliver the SDG as well as profitability in that sense. The third flagship is insurance and risk finance. Here, we have a partnership with the Insurance Development Forum. We have a partnership now recently with the Sustainable Insurance Forum. And the idea is to help governments expand, you know, the microinsurance, the inclusive insurance, so more people can be covered by insurance. At the same time, work at the sovereign and sub-sovereign insurance against climate risk. So that's, and the final one is digital finance. As you all might have seen, last week, the Secretary General released its final report on the Digital Finance Task Force, and together with UNCDF, we are now building an offer on how do we take forward some of the recommendations of the Digital Finance Task Force. So that is how we have structured all this work that UNDP has been doing for many years, underpinned by economic governance and those 7 areas, and how we are structuring our work with the flagships as well. Now, how does all this land in the real world? How does this all happen? So I'm going to turn it over and stop sharing my screen and let others to show you that we've mapped all of our work against the wheel by each one of the 5 regions. So that's going to show up as a PowerPoint, and then I'll give the floor to my colleague Radhika, who is in Bangkok late at night, to talk about Africa first, Asia Pacific first, and then we'll go to our African region and our Arab States region, 3 regions as an example. Over to you, Radhika.
Thank you, Marcos, and good morning and good evening, colleagues. I'm going to take a slightly different position and build on some of the insights that Marcos just shared. At the best of times, many of these service areas around the wheel could be considered a menu of options, with countries saying we want help on SDG budgeting, or how do we make sure that that we can tap into new types of debt instruments. But at this most difficult of all times, probably in our lifetime, the question is really how to integrate these offers and build on what's been done to help countries mobilize maximum resources, figure out how to put in place risk management, tap into new types of financing. So all of these different areas are connected. Asia Pacific, in fact, in Asia Pacific, many of these areas around the world were pioneered, whether it's looking at the development finance assessments, which look at both public and private sources of finance, but not only mapping, but the diagnostics, what needs to change, and how do you build a coalition of the willing, if you like, to bring about that change. But I wanted to focus really now on one specific area, since you will have access to the PowerPoint, and to pick up on a thread that Marcos was talking about, which is, on one hand, we have this situation where there are lots of private investors and private capital who are looking, even in this climate, to invest differently. And so the whole offer of SDG Impact actually speaks to that. But I want to speak a little bit around the right-hand side of the wheel, which is the more public-facing wheel, part of the offer, to talk about green bonds. The government of Indonesia was the first, in fact, to issue what's called the Green Sukuk, the Sharia-compliant bond. And in its latest offer, which was in June, it managed to mobilize, altogether actually managed to mobilize over 2 billion The latest issuance was oversubscribed by 16.66 billion, i.e. 6.7 times. The yields were in fact the lowest in the country's history of global sukuk offerings. And how did we help as UNDP? Through the Innovative Finance Lab with the government of Indonesia. UNDP supported the development of the Green Bond Sukuk framework, project selection based on the use of climate budget tagging. And this is one of the, I'm just going through, just showing how the different areas of the wheel in fact connect. So something that seems fairly technical, which is, tagging the budget based on its climate relevance, actually becomes extraordinarily useful when it comes to the green bond, to demonstrate transparency, to facilitate project selection, and to facilitate reporting. All of these things become much easier. And this is often the challenge for investors, to see where the money is going, to be able to look at impact and to measure it over time. Also with the reporting, the institutional strengthening, and other things. But Indonesia is not alone. Just a few days ago, in fact, the Kingdom of Thailand launched its first sustainability bond, which is a combination of green and social. And also just to say why we find it exciting, because they too got an extraordinarily good interest rate and a long tenor, 1.585%, and the tenor for both portions was actually as long as 15 years. So this is a new opportunity that we see as extraordinarily important to help countries tap into, both governments and private sector, tap into these more innovative sources of finance that speak to the reality of building back better, building back greener, and also tapping into this newfound risk-informed appetite on the part of investors who are looking for these types of new opportunities and moving away from more traditional investments. But let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Oria from our African region will take the floor. She's in Pretoria. Oria. And Ochai, I think you need to flip the slide.
Thanks very much, Marcos, and thanks, colleagues. A pleasure to be here. Let me first of all put us in context regarding the socioeconomic impacts, the dramatic socioeconomic impacts of the pandemic in Africa, which has been already extensive and it is still unfolding. According to the IMF, the regional economy in Africa is projected to contract by 3.2% in 2020, which is pushing up to 39 million people in extreme poverty. We're talking about combined effects of the global economic slowdown, the sharp decline in commodity prices, the disruptions to domestic economic activity, and the cost of those preventive measures that the government had to roll out to face in the face of the COVID, have provoked all of them an extreme shock in the African countries and the African economies, and which is even more concerning considering Africa's high pre-COVID debt levels. What I'm going to share with you as part of this global and African finance sector hub wheel, populated with a number of activities that we've been able to collect from over the years and from the experience of the different teams in UNDP, is the example of how through our work implementing what the Addis Ababa Action Agenda recommended, which is establishing integrated national financing frameworks, how we are supporting African countries to build back better and build back greener, and to transition to a stronger, more resilient and more inclusive sustainable development path. The core message here is having to do much more with much less, which is also urging the need of an integrated approach to finance the post-COVID-19 recovery that on the one hand strengthens the alignment between public and private investment with longer term sustainable development objectives, and on the other builds greater coherence across governance of public and private financing policies. This INFF, what they do is to try to go through all these different areas that we're seeing in this wheel, and they go through, in trying to comprehensively articulate how tax revenues, improved spending efficiency, debt management, international development cooperation, including South-South cooperation, as well as foreign and domestic private sector investment, which is the left part of the wheel, can be aligned, all of them, to finance the post-COVID-19 recovery, while at the same time having the longer-term objective of the SDGs. So one example that I'm going to share with you is the federal government of Nigeria as one of those 16 global pioneering INFF countries that Marcos referred to, where under the leadership of the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President of the on SDGs and the Federal Ministry of Finance, UNDP is collaborating with the EU and with the IMF, as well as other key partners, to roll out the INFF. And we are starting to do this through the conduction of the Development Finance Assessment, the DFA. The DFA is, what it is doing is encouraging a dialogue around financing and engaging and involving a wide range of stakeholders. And it aims at proposing a holistic SDG financing strategy that is structured across its planning, its budgeting, and its financing functions, and covers a range of public, private, domestic, and international finance flows to mobilize those required investments in preparation to that upcoming National Development Plan in Nigeria, which is the Post-Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, the ERGP, until 2030. Under the same broader umbrella of the INFF in Nigeria, and also to demonstrate that coherence and integrated approach that we aim at putting together, not only from the public finance, but also from the private finance, we are anchoring within that INFF work, this work that Marcos referred to, which is the mapping of investment opportunity areas, and this under the SDG Impact Initiative. The idea is that this mapping of investment opportunity areas, the investors mapping, will inform and be part of that SDG financing strategy that we aim at developing in Nigeria. So these investors, this investors mapping is, as I was saying, trying to give us that intelligence that will help us define those pipeline, those projects that could attract private sector and unlock the domestic and the international private sector for Nigeria's development. Being part of this INFF pilot initiative, the experience and SDG financing dialogue in Nigeria will be used and is already being used to promote South-South cooperation between and among the countries in Africa, which at the moment are 30 countries and conducting and rolling out these INFF initiatives, but 60 countries globally. So I'm going to stop there. Over to the next speaker. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Now, Alessandro from our Arab states, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Marcos. Hi, colleagues. And I saw now the question from Ahmed in the chat. So I will try to respond to his question. I mean, when this offer comes to the Arab states, if we look at the context, we see that the Arab states, without generalizing it, but is often suffering from many protracted conflict and crisis. Plus, definitely dealing with a significant number of refugees, displaced people, migrants. So very much those left behind, no? So against this context, the current pandemic is definitely an additional crisis. that we now say, you know, in the region we see a crisis on top of a crisis within a larger crisis. And that's definitely the context where this offer and this financing offer, it's coming to a ground. So definitely not an easy context. UNDP, just for you also to give you a couple of figures. I mean, if we, and we have done it along with the other agencies, member states, OECD, we have analyzed the development financing to the region over the last 10 years. And we see that the top two streams are personal remittances to the tune of 43%. So we're talking about 440 billion. Followed by FDI to the tune of 22%. Then as a third stream, ODA is ranking. Now, the first two streams are definitely affected by this COVID-19 pandemic, and we have seen it over the last few months. To the point that ESCWA has already estimated that in 2020, the losses in GDP will be around 42 billion. And in terms of jobs, we will be losing 1.7 million jobs this year across the region, very much affecting mainly the young population. So all in all, the current COVID crisis is definitely threatening the sustainable development efforts across all sectors in the region. And those factors, I mean, are not only the recent, as I was saying, no, multi-layer crisis. Is not only COVID now, but definitely those conflicts at different level, could be regional, national, as well as local. But then most importantly, other two, I mean, not recent, but we start seeing the consequence of the climate change kicking in. I mean, we saw the latest also in the Gulf, Iraq lately, the really how climate change is kicking in and creating and affecting also the business environment. And lately the collapse of oil prices. So really, if we like a perfect storm to the region, and again, without generalizing differences among countries. Now, in all of this, what UNDP does, and I think this will, what Marcos was presenting, is very much what we do on the ground, and we're trying to do also in a conflict and in a crisis environment. And our role is very much of integrating, so it's our integrator role, and already from funding to financing, also in crisis countries, and I come to your point, Ahmed, with a concrete example. What UNDP is trying to do is helping national government partners to leverage, blend, and sequence all the funding/financing streams. So from DAC, non-DAC to vertical funds, global, GCF, global fund, to IFIs, DFIs investment, to government financing and private sector. So very much really an integrator platform. And a concrete example is in Iraq. So crisis definitely context, where we, complementing our stabilization work and facility work, we have established and set up a response and resilience program, which very much focuses on short-term and medium-term projects to support those left behind. So the vulnerable populations, either IDPs, refugees, returnees, in host communities and liberated areas. And in that context, we brought together DAC donors, US, Japan, Germany, just to list few of them, Kuwait, UK, DFIs, KfW, and the private sector, Toyota, Iraq. And here, Ahmed, it's your point. So we brought very much a private sector company like Toyota, very much in relation to its core business and making it sustainable, very much to support the SDGs in Iraq, to provide both men and women with vocational training and on-the-job work experience, very much to secure sustainable then opportunities and livelihoods and development. Now, we tested it in Iraq, we scaled it up in Iraq, and recently the same partnership was then replicated in Libya with Toyota. And the model then was in June this year, currently also, this current June 2020, was also taken by Kia Motors, and we are now designing jointly, another program in Libya. So just a concrete example on how we are, and even more difficult in such a crisis conflict countries, how this integrator role and how the private sector could really come in along with the DAC, non-DAC donors, DFIs, like in the case of KfW, and very much contributing to sustainable development. I think I leave it here and open to a further discussion with you, colleagues. Thanks, Marcos.
Thank you, Alessandro. Just to say that we have a wheel for Latin America and the CIS in Eastern Europe, and we don't do this alone. So there's a last slide on all the partnerships that we do. Can we put, yeah, so we don't do this alone. We do this in a lot of partnerships with DFIs, IFIs, private sector, and many of you governments around the world. So over to you for any questions in that sense, and we will put more examples of the private sector working in there. Just so you know, we are in conversations with, we've been advising Microsoft on how Microsoft can accomplish its own goal of becoming a net zero carbon company, right? For the next 10 years. So we are actually helping Microsoft to think it through and how it changes its business models in that way. So over to any questions, any comments that you might have here now. You know, just to pick it up, while you might have any comments and questions, just to pick it up on Ulrika's point at the beginning, in terms of you know, the importance of you know, build back better, and the importance of this moment now. As you all know, the Secretary General has created this finance, you know, COVID recovery and beyond process, which will have a ministerial meeting on September 8th and a heads of state meeting on the 29th. And we as UNDP have been facilitated, you know, one of the discussion groups, there are 6 of them, but the one that focus on recovery better for sustainability. And a lot of the conversations, and I think was reassured for us at UNDP, you know, has actually kind of validated some of the flagships and some of the work that we've been doing for years. But it's, again, as we said, it is incredibly essential right now that you know, governments, when they are looking at the immediately response, which maybe it's not necessarily linked or is not necessarily pursuing the set of policies for the long term because we have immediate needs, but that those needs and the policies put in place now can serve as seeds for, you know, the long-term policies that are necessary that allow us to kind of transition from this recovery better to this transition to the immediate needs to the SDGs and the recovery better. That's why in our work on the integrated national financial frameworks, as well as on our investment maps, we quickly added elements, right, of the immediate needs and the immediate investment opportunities that then link back to the larger work. Perhaps another point that I wanted to highlight is that we have a center, a policy center on private sector in development, which is a partnership with the Turkish government and sits in Istanbul, serving the whole world. And through that center, the left part of the wheel, a lot of that work, business models, you know, investment facilities are led from that partnership with the Turkish government out of Istanbul in that sense. So any other questions and comments, colleagues? If there is nothing else, I think, Nick, we can close early and let everybody else to start with their days around the wood.
Okay, very good then, Marcos and colleagues. Then in that case, thank you very much to all of you who've participated. Marcos and team, thank you for your presentation this morning. As was outlined in the beginning, our COVID offer from UNDP is an important one. We shared that with you back in July. UNDP's response continues, and this open dialogue series, the purpose is to share with you as directly and openly as possible beyond the formal mechanisms that we have to engage with you and to work with you and to be able to position ourselves with you based on the demands that you have made and the expectations that you have of the UN and UNDP more broadly. So today you heard us on financing and financing for the SDGs, including in the COVID offer. And we'll be continuing to present to you through this open dialogue series, further in-depth view and further opportunities to explore with us the many evolving themes, both on the COVID offer and as UNDP also designs its new strategic plan going forward into 2021. We hope to feature for you the gender components of our COVID response on the 1st of September, for which we will also be sending you an invitation very shortly. Again, everything that we've recorded over the last 5 sessions, we'll be putting this up on the intranet for your constant and continued engagement. Please do take a look. We'll be sharing that link with you as well. And we make sure to continue with this dialogue series to position the UNDP organization that you're funding and that you're supporting going forward in the response to this important crisis that is setting milestones for us as well as our many bilateral partners. So on that note, I'd like to thank Marcos and all the participants, and we hope to see you again soon as we send to you the next invitation for the next open dialogue series. Thank you very much to everyone, and we look forward to seeing you online again very soon.